Hi everyone, I'm Sam from the Danger Planet, and I'm joined today by Jesse from Boring Conversation. And today we're going to be talking about the Ten Thunders.
Yes, definitely. Ten Thunders, they were my second faction, as it were, and I've had them for quite some time. Love them.
Yeah, the Ten Thunders were introduced at the end of first edition, and the idea is that they are a crime syndicate from the Three Kingdoms, which is Japan, China, and Vietnam. They, in this timeline, have formed kind of a political union. And the Ten Thunders are infiltrating the other factions. So when they were first released, every Ten Thunders master was a dual faction master with somebody else. They were all infiltrating the faction that they had been sneaking into. They were the first dual faction models in the game, and they're pretty cool. Since then, the faction's expanded. It's taken more of a mechanical identity all its own. Ten Thunders tends to be very fast, very aggressive, somewhat fragile sometimes, but not always. But they have a lot of really cool mobility and damaging tricks.
Yeah, they're very, very neat. And they also have, they're kind of well known as having one of the best versatile stables of models in the game, which even after some adjustments is still certainly the case.
R.I.P. Fuhatsu.
He's still pretty good. New Hatsu is pretty good.
He's fine. He's
fine.
All right. So we're going to first talk about Asami Tanaka. Now, the Ten Thunders is mostly the Katanaka crime family, but they do tend to bring in outsiders who they need for specific things, and Asami is one of those. She was a Miko, a shrine maiden in Japan, at a shrine that was, unbeknownst to her, meant to sustain us. I believe this was a seal into the realm of the Oni. Yeah. And what happened was an Oni spirit, because in this world, Oni, as you may know, Japanese demon spirits, are actually these demons that dwell in a realm called Beyond. An Oni called Amanjaku saw her through Beyond and was grooming her to be his portal into our world. When her shrine was attacked by treasure hunters, she was stabbed and left for dead, and Amanjaku struck. And he offered her a deal that he would save her life and even give her the children she'd always dreamed of if she pledged to serve him. Now, what she didn't know was that by children, he meant dreadful Oni demons that are born from a maw that is embedded in the back of her head. You see, Asami is now cursed with this horrible maw in her, hidden by her hair. And from this, she can bring forth these horrible Oni monsters. They can't live for very long in our world. They flicker in and out of existence. But while they're here, they can do terrible damage.
Yeah,
So,
very cool.
Asami is a summoner, and her key mechanic is flicker. Now, flicker tokens are something that you place on your Oni models. Now, any Oni model can place a flicker token to basically get a focus on an opposed duel. That's effectively what it does. Also, various abilities that she and other models have can put flicker tokens on models, including when she summons a model, she puts flicker tokens on it, and it gains a flicker token every turn. Now, you don't want to have too many, because if you ever have 3 or more flicker tokens at the end of any activation, you die instantly. You pop out of existence. But Oni can kill enemy models to eat their soul and remove their flicker and stay around for longer. She tends to summon very powerful models, very high-impact models that don't stick around for long. But she also has some really cool creative board control abilities. I think most notably, whenever a nearby model, including herself, would charge, instead of doing a normal charge, it can simply place within a number of inches of itself equal to its movement, which both extends its range and means it can go right through terrain, right through models, right through anything. Just blink, like kind of a J-horror movie, pop up in your face.
Yep, and you can definitely tell that there were some issues that came up in playtesting, because she has a front of card ability where friendly Oni models cannot gain flicker tokens when being controlled by enemy models, which is a very, very important safeguard for her crew.
She also has some just passive buffs. She has Arcane Reservoir, which makes your hand bigger, which is pretty great. And she can discard cards to pawn attacks off on Oni, so she stays alive, because she will be taking some damage. She has various abilities where she can deal damage to herself to benefit her Oni by removing flicker tokens or the like from them.
Yep, she has a front of card ability, which is a whopping 10-inch aura, where after a friendly Oni model ends its activation within that aura, this model, meaning Asami, can suffer 2 irreducible damage to discard a flicker token from that model. So for her summons, which we didn't mention it yet, but when she summons a model, they gain an upgrade where when they activate, they immediately gain a flicker token, thereby reducing the amount of time that they can stay on the table and essentially putting a time limit on them being in-game. There are a variety of ways on her card, both with this front of card ability, an ability on the back of her card, which is tied to her summon, and then another tactical action, plus her totem, and a variety of other effects that can help remove these flicker tokens and manage them, so that if you're careful, you can actually keep these summons on the table for quite some time.
And she's not just summoning either. She does have an attack with the maw in the back of her head. It's actually kind of a unique attack. It's a 2/4/6, but it has an execute trigger, which is pretty cool. So you might want to actually charge her. She also has reaching tendrils, which is a short-ranged range attack. I think it's her pulling up with her hair. And it pushes the target 6 inches in any direction, which is quite a significant push.
Yep, and then she has 2 different triggers on that ability. One on a ram gives her rip and tear so that she can take a melee attack against the same model that gets a positive flip on the duel. Or on a mask, she can cause another friendly model to take a melee attack targeting that one. So it actually helps with action efficiency quite a bit. The reaching tendrils can really mess up your opponent's ability to score their points, making her a very appealing late activation master, because nothing that she really does on her card has to happen at the start of the turn. She's one that you can wait for your moment to attack, pounce in, and have some significant effects, denying opponents scoring, enabling your own model scoring, and then sometimes swinging in with that 2/4/6 damage track with the execute can take out some models at key points in the game.
I think she's a pretty well-rounded master. She has reasonable attacks. She has summons. She has some buffing ability. I think she's pretty strong overall.
Yeah, I would say that she's definitely the poster child for probably, in my opinion, the most balanced summoning master in the game.
Oh, yeah. But her title version is actually pretty unique. She has left aside summoning entirely. Instead, her title version, Asami Tanaka Shintaku, focuses on rift markers. She's able to tear rifts through to the realm of the Oni. These rift markers are hazardous, and she can drop them as shockwaves. And when an Oni is near a rift marker, it can teleport to another rift marker or to her. And she also has various abilities that let you pull enemy models into the rifts and spit them out from another rift. So she has some really cool mobility control. She no longer has the ability to summon, but she does passively remove flicker tokens from her crew, which is pretty powerful. She doesn't have to take the damage for it. And she also has the unique ability Chains of the Earth, which is kind of similar to Molly's ability, where if you take the same action twice in her line of sight, you get damage. In Asami's case, you gain injured, which is less immediately impactful than damage, but a model with a couple of injured on it is dead.
Yeah, and because of the way that her other keyword models lay out, she has a bunch of models in keyword with very threatening attack actions, things like Amonozako and Joragumo, and being able to get some injured on key enemy models and then dive in with those heavy hitters can really have a big impact. All of a sudden, you're almost guaranteeing hits with big damage tracks and very impactful triggers.
Now, if I have to nitpick on Asami, and I do, she has a hard time with her core ability just because there aren't that many ways to produce rift markers. It's pretty much just her shockwave attack into the beyond. Now, she can do that as many times as she wants, but still, trading 1 AP for 1 rift marker is a little tough to swallow sometimes, especially because when an Oni pops out of a rift marker, it has to remove that marker. And the markers are themselves destructible, so your opponents can remove them if they want to.
Yeah, the things that really can help turn her on are when she does drop a rift with that shockwave, it doesn't just drop a rift, it does cause a duel or force some damage on your opponent, and friendly Oni models can ignore the effects of the shockwave and are unaffected by these rift markers. On a mask, she can actually place any enemy models that were damaged by this ability anywhere within 1 inch of the rift marker, immediately triggering the hazardous effect. And there's some kind of cute things that you can do by stacking her and the Kamatachi, a not very commonly chosen model, to stack up multiple types of hazardous auras, along with Amonozako, potentially creating an area where you can get 3 overlapping hazardous markers with the ability to pick up your opponent's models and place them. It can be pretty threatening. It's a little tough to set up, and it's a small area of influence, but if your opponent stumbles into it, they're in trouble.
I'd also say she has one very cool tactical action. Yeah. Wrath of the Kimon says that she can pick a model with From Beyond, so an Oni, and it gets to activate a second time that turn. At the start of that activation, it gets 3 flicker tokens, which means unless it already has 0 flicker tokens and can kill something during that activation, it's certain to die. But sometimes you just really need to get that second activation. And also, if a model's going to die anyway, like if it's already activated, and now your opponent is marshaling forces to kill it, you can Wrath of the Kimon it, and then activate that model, and before your opponent gets a chance to kill it, you just get in there and really do some damage. So
And if that model reactivates within Asami's 8-inch aura on the front of her card, might be a 6-inch aura, actually, now that I think about it. Suffice it to say, if they activate within this aura, it's 8 inches, and they end a move, they just remove a flicker token and gain shielded 1. So if you're staying within that relatively large bubble, you are guaranteed not to die from that second activation.
If you really don't want to die.
If you really don't want to die. Another really cool trick that she has, and this is not something you'll use every game, but she's got a possession trigger on her Spiritual Invasion action. Now, the Spiritual Invasion action does only 2/3 damage, and you can give your the opponent's model a choice of either injured 1 or staggered. But if you hit the possession trigger, you bury another friendly Oni within 8 inches of Asami, and the target. And then when the buried model activates, it unburies within 1 inch of the target or Asami. So if you sniff out that your opponent has a positional scheme, like Breakthrough, for instance, and you get a possession trigger through on them, you're guaranteed to be able to deny that by holding your buried model's activation until the end of the turn.
So she's pretty cool. I'm a big fan. I don't think she's as strong as the original Asami. I think she could maybe use a few more ways to make rift markers, but I like her.
Yeah, she's definitely got some cool play, and she's fun. She really is a lot of fun.
So who are we talking about next?
Next up, we've got Jakob Lynch, Master of the Honeypot.
Oh, Jakob Lynch. So Lynch was a gambler, and he was both extremely lucky and extremely unlucky. He was lucky because he won a casino in a card game, the Honeypot. He was unlucky because it turns out running a casino is pretty hard, and soon he was in terrible debt to the Ten Thunders. He needed money, and so he turned to these two mysterious figures, Mr. Graves and Mr. Tannen, who promised him all the money he would need to pay the Thunders if they could use the Honeypot's basement. No questions asked. He said yes, because the alternative was to have his legs broken and be thrown in the canal. And he actually found his luck was changing. People would be flocking to the Honeypot to play the games of chance, to drink the whiskey, and to enjoy the company of his beckoners. And they seemed really addicted. They kept coming back. Of course, sooner or later, he realized this had something to do with the people in the basement. Going down there, he saw that Graves and Tannen had this horrifying spirit monster creature there that was actively draining the life out of one of the Honeypot's patrons. It turned out what happened is this creature, the Hungering Darkness, took up residence in his basement with its servants, Graves and Tannen, who were actually Neverborn, a woe and a Nephilim that served it, but it had human disguises. And they used this creature's brilliance, which is this addictive energy it gives out, to suffuse the Honeypot's whiskey and other things in the casino to make people addicted to it. They'd keep coming back, and they'd keep getting suffused with brilliance, which would mutate their bodies, and eventually the darkness would feed on them, drawing out all the brilliance and their spirit in the process. And it tried to do this to Lynch, but for whatever reason, Lynch is naturally immune to brilliance. And so the two of them made a deal. So now Lynch runs his casino and occasionally feeds somebody to the darkness, and the darkness protects him and keeps the punters rolling in.
Yeah, and brilliance is one of Lynch's crew's key mechanics. A lot of models in his crew can either hand out brilliance tokens to friendly or enemy models. Lynch himself has some pretty powerful interactions with brilliance, in that when an enemy model targets him, if they have a brilliance token, they automatically suffer a negative flip, which is pretty nasty. Another major key ability of the keyword is Rig the Deck. Now, Rig the Deck is a pretty interesting ability where every model in his keyword is going to have Rig the Deck anywhere between +1 or +3. And at the start of their activation, they draw that many cards from the top of their Fate deck and then place that many cards from their control hand back on top of their Fate deck before they discard for maximum hand size. So what this means is that every time one of your models activates, you know exactly what cards are available. You can make sure that you put the cards that you need in your hand, and you know exactly which abilities you can take and which ones are going to succeed or fail based on the stuff that you have coming in the deck or sitting in your hand. Very powerful ability. It
really is. It's very, very strong. And Lynch himself has a lot of cool ways to kind of mess with probability and with cards. He has, hold 'em. Whenever an enemy cheats fate within 6, they take a point of damage. But Lynch is one of those masters whose totem is a major part of his crew. His totem, the Hungering Darkness, is deadly. Very powerful melee attack, an obey. It's terrifying. It's got a ton of health. It has self-healing. It is generally a very, very strong ability. And it can suck up brilliance to heal or to get plus twists on its attacks.
Mm-hmm. And Lynch on his own is no slouch. He can do some pretty significant tricks with his backup card abilities. Even his gun, a seemingly innocuous Derringer with only an 8-inch range, has the ability to hand out a significant number of brilliance tokens based on the number of masks in the duel total, one of which is built in. He can also give out slow, and most importantly, he can place a friendly Hungering Darkness model within 1 inch of the target.
Just feeds you to the darkness.
Yeah, and that's regardless of range. Hungering Darkness could be all the way across the table, and if he hits you with his gun with that tome trigger, Huggy's right in your face.
And a lot of the abilities with Brilliance are kind of on or off, like either your opponent has Brilliance or they don't. But there are some abilities that really benefit stacking it up. And one of them, Succumb to Darkness, is Lynch's signature attack. It's an attack that reduces the target's Brilliance by up to 5 and deals up to 5 points of damage to them. But if it kills them, you can summon a friendly Honeypot minion. So you can summon a Beckoner, a Depleted, or an Illuminated, which all reflect different people with different levels of Brilliance saturation. And you can summon one based on the number of Brilliance tokens the target had. So if you can stack those Brilliance tokens up really high, and lots of models in his crew have the ability to do that, you can summon friendlies as you kill enemies. Very strong ability.
Yep, definitely. It's one of those abilities in the game that can really skew the math of a turn, where especially if you can kill a model with that ability that hasn't activated yet, and then turn it into one of your own models, thereby gaining an activation, it can really swing the turn significantly.
Yeah, but Lynch's title form shows he's a little bit desperate. Jakob Lynch's title form, Dark Bet, reflects what happened after the Neverborn launched an attack on the Honeypot. Now, Lynch survived, but his nerves were pretty shot. He started drinking the whiskey to calm himself, and that meant for the first time, he finally started getting affected by Brilliance. And so this version of Jakob Lynch, he's no longer in charge. This version of Jakob Lynch, actually, when you hire him, the Hungering Darkness becomes your leader, which is really cool. That means it has 3 AP. When you hire him, he has 5 Brilliance tokens on him. And whenever your Darkness dies, it teleports to Lynch, heals equal to the amount of Brilliance tokens he has on him, and he takes damage equal to that same amount of Brilliance tokens, which means that you can have the Darkness recur again and again and again by draining Lynch's life. And Lynch himself can add or remove Brilliance tokens through a variety of abilities to kind of control how much of his life he cares to spend every time he does that.
He also has a really cool front of card ability called Delirium, where once per activation, after a model, not an enemy model, but a model within 6 inches gains a Brilliance token, this model can either move it up to 2 inches or have it suffer a damage. And because there are a variety of ways to hand out Brilliance tokens to models in your own crew, you can actually use this ability to do small little repositioning tricks throughout the course of the turn, or ping your opponent, or potentially move them out of position with no resist. It's pretty slick.
Lynch also has Luck Thief, which is a very strong ability, which basically makes it impossible to get positive twists against him. They all become negative twists. And if an enemy fails an action against him, he heals too, which is really helpful if he's taking that damage to bring the darkness back.
Yeah, definitely. And he has some very powerful back of card abilities as well. One in particular, Feed the Darkness, where until the end phase, models that end their activation within range have to pass a TN12 willpower duel or gain a Brilliance token, which ties in directly with his front of card ability. Friendly models can choose to automatically fail this duel, giving you a bunch of control over their movement. And then he has the Inner Glow trigger, where friendly models within range gain a Brilliance token and heal 1. So you can give a Brilliance token to a model, move it, heal it 1, and then your opponent has to take a bunch of tests, or not even tests, TN12 tests, or they'll end up getting moved or damaged as well. It has a fairly large area of influence of 6 inches.
I also really like the fact that his melee attack reflects that he has basically become a super illuminated. He has the same melee attack they do, which is a 2/3/5 with a built-in trigger that lets him discard Brilliance off of himself for the target to make it a 3/4/6. So he's not necessarily someone you need to be in melee, but 3/4/6 in melee is pretty respectable. And he's got 3 AP, so you might as well. I think Dark Bet's a lot of fun and very, very powerful.
Yeah, and he can really go a long way towards keeping Hungering Darkness alive, who's already a fairly difficult model to deal with because of the incorporeal and terrifying. Once per turn, for a duel that only needs a 6, he can remove up to 3 Brilliance tokens from a model, and from this model, and then for each Brilliance token removed, choose a friendly Honeypot within range and heal it 2, and it gains a Brilliance token.
I just want to point out that before the recent nerfs, you would take Terracotta Warriors with him. He would take a big chunk of damage, bringing the darkness back, and then you just heal him for 6 with a single just like you, which is one of the reasons they got rid of that ability.
Yeah.
Lynch is very strong and a lot of fun, and a very flavorful crew, too. The idea that they're all the staff of a casino is pretty neat.
Yeah, very, very cool. Definitely a neat master, and one that I actually just bought into, so I'm looking forward to playing him.
All right, so next up is...
Lucas McCabe.
Lucas. Lucas was originally a dual faction 10 Thunders guild model. He's a bit like Indiana Jones as played by Hugh Jackman. Lucas McCabe, the relic hunter, likes to go around the world digging up relics, and he has this crew of wastrels who are basically rich ne'er-do-wells and the scions of noble families who follow him around. He pays them in trinkets by handing out these relics that he's dug up and giving them various abilities with those. But Lucas McCabe has been kicked out of the guild following the ascension of the new Governor General, but he's found a new patron in the Explorer Society. So he's a dual faction master with 10 Thunders in the Society. And he's on a horse.
He sure is. He actually has a demise ability called Dismount, where after you knock out his fairly low 10 wounds, after he's killed, he gets replaced with Lucas McCabe Dismounted Hunter. Incidentally, this was actually the first incidence of titles being in the game as soon as 3rd edition launched.
Yeah. He also, you drop a corpse marker, RIP his horse.
Yeah.
So this version of McCabe is very much about digging up these relics and handing them out to his crew. He's very fast with speed 7, unimpeded, trample, so he can move over enemy models, and a ride with me. And his whole crew has looted supplies. So if they're near scrap or corpse markers, they can draw cards. But he wants to use those scrap or corpse markers because he can dig them up and turn them into powerful relics. There's a few different relics. There's the sword, which gives your models precise. There's the mirror, which gives your models know the warrior. And then there's the mask, which gives your models life leech. So it's more one offensive, one defensive, and one kind of mixed.
Yep. And each one of those relic upgrades also comes with a unique bonus action, giving you a lot of options during these models' activations. Another key thing is anytime a model equips one of those relics, if they activate in the same turn that relic was equipped, they actually gain fast.
Yeah, so they can really do spend a lot of AP getting around the board. McCabe himself isn't that dangerous in melee, but he does have a really powerful net gun, which does blast damage that automatically slows and staggers everyone who's damaged by it. So if you can get to at least a moderate and get that blast, you can spread around slow and staggered in an AoE, which is really crippling to your opponent's crew.
Yeah, and it's a stat 6 on move, and the majority of models in the game are going to be at a stat disadvantage when targeted by this ability.
So I think this McCabe is pretty cool. He's very fast. He's very mobile. His goal is to debilitate your enemy while pushing your own crew around. But his title, Lucas McCabe Tomb Delver, is very cool. So Tomb Delver McCabe has gotten rid of the horse. He's a little bit more grizzled. But his goal here is to get into the necropolis underneath Malifaux City, and he's been gathering supplies to prepare for an expedition to do that. So this McCabe is dealing not so much with the powerful beneficial relics, although he does still have those. He's dealing with cursed items. So whenever one of his friendly models has a relic, they put out a 5-inch aura that says enemy models in that aura suffer a -1 on all of their attack actions.
Yeah, it's another one of those abilities that can mess with the math of the game. Incidentally, his original title also has a similar ability where he can reduce the TN of his friendly models' actions, which is very impactful because a lot of his models have relatively high TNs. This one is going to put your opponent at a stat disadvantage. A lot of times it's going to force your opponent to be attacking him with a stat 6 or even a stat 4, or a stat 5 or even a stat 4, which is pretty crippling.
Yeah. So this McCabe also has the ability to use the bonus action on his relics at the end of his activation as like an extra bonus action. So that's kind of neat. Makes you want to put a relic on him, also to keep him safe. He's also just pretty dangerous compared to the original one. He has a Bleeder Lash, which is the same melee attack as Madame Sybil. Importantly, it's a weak 3, and if you give him the glowing saber, it's precise, so it ignores everything. And it also has kind of a nasty trigger where you push enemy models within pulse 2 of him 2 inches away and have them take a point of damage. And that lets him take a shot with his nasty gun, the Pepper Box, which is not that much damage. It's only a 2-3-4, but it has a blast on everyone and it stuns everyone it hits. Do you remember when what's his face, Von Stuck had a melee attack or a ranged attack that did stunned and also had a blast on the weak, and it was so strong they had to nerf it and take the blast off the weak?
Yeah.
Well, McCabe has it.
Yeah, indeed. He's pretty cool too. He has a lot of action efficiency in his crew. one of the really, really powerful things that he can do is, with his bonus action, he can attach an artifact to a friendly wastrel within 10 inches of a targeted scrap, or I'm sorry, he can target a scrap marker within 10 inches and then equip one of those relic upgrades to a friendly wastrel within 5 inches of that targeted marker. And then he can actually pulse out focus to all friendly models within 5 inches of the model that equipped the ability. Or he can force opponents to take TN 13 willpower duels or gain stunned.
Yeah, this guy hands out a lot of stunned. He can also, dig up scrap markers himself, which is not something the original McCabe can do and is a weakness of the crew, because he does need those scrap or corpse markers. The original McCabe relies on his dog Luna or Jesse Halliday to dig them up. This one could just drop them with a tome trigger on his take what you can carry tactical action. So I think Tomb Delver is a bit slower. He's a bit more straightforward. He marches up the board, but he has so many powerful debuffs on the enemy and some fairly powerful buffs on allies that I think he's a very strong master.
And from a scheming standpoint, he has a lot of models in his crew that are extremely fast, and he actually has on that take what you can carry ability, the ability to give a friendly model ignoring range staggered and allow them to take the interact action. So you can use Rough Riders or Desper or Hucksters to get way far afield, and then you can let them take interact outside their activation, and that's how you score points.
Now, I want to point out, that action has no range, but it does not ignore line of sight.
Right.
You do need line of sight to the person, which makes sense. He's shouting, take what you can carry, and you kind of need a line so you can do that.
Indeed. Very, very cool master. One that, some people think that McCabe is maybe not as strong in Explorer Society, but after I've done a little bit of digging into his crew, he's got some pretty cool tricks he can do in ES, that's for sure.
I guess we're going to find out.
We're going to find out. We have a game coming up.
Yeah, Jesse and I have a game coming up. He'll be playing ES McCabe into my Yon Lo 2.
Yeah, that's going to be...
Pray for me. I'm having an uphill battle.
Pray for me? You kidding me?
Yeah.
So let's see who we got next. We have...
Misaki.
Yes.
So Misaki Katanaka is the leader of the 10 Thunders. In the former edition, she was simply the lieutenant. Her father, Baojun Katanaka, was in charge. But at the end of second edition, she got sick of the old man, who was frankly kind of an asshole. Very aggressive, thoughtless, very vile man. So she killed him and she usurped his spot. Misaki is pretty much the epitome of a ninja. Yeah. With her keyword Last Blossom, she flips out and kills people. That's her thing. She can drop shadow markers, 2 of them at the start of the turn, and during her activation, she can pop out of a shadow marker. She buries herself when she drops them, so you can't even attack her until she pops out. Now, she also wants to activate early, because the more of your friendly models that have activated before her, it reduces her movement when she pops out. But if you activate her early, she can pop out of one of those markers and then charge, and she has a very deadly melee attack. She gets that built-in plus twist on the damage when she charges. She can charge while engaged, so you can't exactly stop her. And her Bicento is pretty strong. I mean, it's a stat 7, so it's very accurate. And it has the crit strike, reposition, and execute triggers. So you can generally force your opponent to discard or just deal a hefty, 3, 5, 6 damage, which is not to be sneezed at.
Yeah, she's a model that... she can be very resource intensive. If your opponent manages to get to grips with her, while she does have stat 6 defense and stat 7 willpower, the only other defense that she really has is extended reach. So she can tend to be a little bit hungry on stones, and if you want to put out maximum damage with her, if you start swinging with your stat 7 attack, you have a ram in hand, and then you stone for another ram, she's dealing min 4 damage with a built-in positive flip on that damage when she charges, so she can deal a substantial amount of damage.
She's also got a little bit of crew support with the Oyabun's command, which pretty much lets a target take the charge action, and if she's targeting a Last Blossom model, it can even charge while engaged. Yeah. And she has a very cute little bonus action called Abandon Honor, which, as I said, she wants to activate early, but Abandon Honor actually makes you activate as really early, because for every friendly model that is not activated, you get to shuffle a card from your discard pile into your deck. And on a crow trigger, for each crow you shuffle, one of your opponent's models has to discard a card or gain stunned. So you can really pressure your opponent's hand and build up your deck a little bit if you've just managed to kind of flip some cards in her activation.
Yeah, I mean, having played Misaki quite a bit, this ability can be absolutely devastating. You wouldn't think that you'd flip that many cards if she activates first or second in a turn, but you can easily get to 20 cards in your discard pile by the time she's done with her activation, and then you're shuffling 6, 7, 8 severe, severe and moderates back in, plus forcing a bunch of discard on your opponent, can be pretty nasty. And that Oyabun's command ability that Sam mentioned, you'd think you make a friendly model take a charge action, and that's all well and good. But one thing you need to remember is that one of her keyword abilities is charge through. So really every other model in the crew is going to gain those positive flips on damage from charging. So it can make for some pretty devastating attacks.
Yeah, so moving to her title, Misaki Katanaka fractured, she started to feel a bit more of the pressure of being in charge. So this Misaki is a lot calmer. She no longer has her Bacento. Instead, she's got an ink-tipped dart, which is a little dart she can shoot at somebody and drop a shadow marker touching them, which is important because she has a lot of cool shadow marker synergy. Particularly when she's targeting somebody near a shadow marker, she can add a suit to her dual totals, which is very important. And she also can get shielded whenever a shadow marker is placed near her, and she can ignore them. So she doesn't get, she doesn't suffer from, the downside of shadow markers, which is that they do concealing. Her big thing is obey.
Yeah.
She's an obey master. She has her obey has 2 triggers, and remember, she can build in one of those triggers if the target's near a shadow marker. If you're targeting enemies, you can do Will of the Corrupted and give them injured, and if you're targeting friendlies, you can do Will of the Oyabun and give them focused.
Yep.
I mean, technically, you can also focus enemies. You can immediately spend it. That's fine. But the point is that they're designed to be flexible and let you do either.
Yeah, and some of the really important things to remember about this particular obey are that for most masters that obey, concealment is a big problem for them.
It's the only defense, really.
It's one of the only defenses against obey, because you're putting your opponent at a negative flip, and they're going to end up having to either use focus, which is very inefficient, or using a soul stone to get the positive. She just innately ignores concealment. So that level of defense against the obey is gone. And then the other important thing to remember about the timing of this ability is that those triggers, the injured and the focus, happen before the resulting ability. So she can make one of your models charge, give it focus before it takes the charge action. It then charges, attacks with focus, and then is going to be on a double positive on the damage flip because of charge through and the focus that you've just given them. Or you can actually give enemy models injured, which, you don't really target enemy models with obeys too often, but that's a nice little bonus, especially where the suit's probably going to be built in. Another cool thing, too, is that her ability to put out shadow markers is actually significantly higher than you might expect. You look at her card, and on the back of her card, she really only has one ability that puts out a shadow marker. But she's got a front of card ability where once per activation, after a Last Blossom or enemy model takes an action generated from a non-charge effect, meaning the obey, or gains fast, which all of the models in her crew have assassin. So if they kill an enemy model before it's activated, they gain fast. You get to drop a shadow marker into base contact with those models. So the number of shadow markers can really start to increase dramatically as the turn goes. It's one that you really have to pay attention to when you're playing her, because it's easy to miss opportunities to drop them, but your opponent can very quickly find themselves overwhelmed with shadow markers on the table. And all that concealment can really add a great level of defense to a crew that can actually be fairly vulnerable to shooting.
Yeah, they're pretty squishy. Beyond that, mostly what she's doing is pushing people around, dropping schemes, doing positional tricks. I think she's a little finicky compared to Misaki 1. And of course, Obey Masters always have the downside that they're relying on other models to kind of do their dirty work for them. But she's got some play to her, at least. I'd like to sort of see her on the board.
And she's got a really neat trick where she can actually, on a tome trigger on her Twisting Paths ability, bury one of your own models, and then when that model activates, it can unbury in base contact with a friendly shadow marker.
Any friendly shadow marker.
Any friendly shadow marker.
Really bounce across the board, which is good for people like Ototo who are very slow.
Yep, and it can help protect some relatively squishy models that hit very, very hard, like a Toto, Katanaka crime bosses, so on and so forth.
And that's Misaki.
That's Misaki.
So next, we're going to be talking about Shenlong.
Shenlong.
I love Shenlong. I know a lot of people are like lukewarm on Shenlong. I think he's great.
Shenlong was the original, the OG boogeyman of M3E when he came out. He had one of the first erratas to tone him down a little bit because of the really silly stuff that he could do. Quite frankly, he is still very powerful.
He's powerful in a more straightforward way. So Shenlong is the host of the tyrant, the dragon. The dragon, when the tyrants were being imprisoned, split its essence in half, and half of that essence fled to Earth. Earthside, it found that it could move around only by anchoring itself to a person. It possessed a shaman, but it found out that when she died, it was stuck with her corpse. And it lay there for hundreds of years until a monk found the body, and the dragon jumped to the monk. And in order to prevent this happening again, the dragon used that monk to found an order of temples in which it was basically grooming hosts. So the temples of the four rivers are in this valley, and they practice a form of Shaolin where they are training their bodies and their minds, and they think that they're training for great martial and spiritual perfection, but unbeknownst to them, it's all under the direction of the dragon. Shenlong is the dragon's current host. He was a monk who about 70 years ago was called in to see his master who was dying and to receive the dragon. And so Shenlong's key ability is Qi. All of his monks can harness their Qi. They usually get one just for showing up every turn, just at the start of their activation, and whenever they concentrate, they can choose to gain a Qi instead of a focus. And while Shenlong's in play, friendly monks can concentrate multiple times per activation. And so what can you do with Qi? Well, a few models have abilities to discard Qi to trigger an ability, but mostly what it's used for is after you flip a card but before you cheat, you can discard a Qi to add 2 to your duel total, which is really, really good. It's good for things like terrifying duels. It's good for hitting your TNs. And on an attack, if you really need to hit, you can push yourself up to stat 7 or 8, which makes it very difficult for opponents to guarantee the miss.
Yeah, and there are a lot of models in his keyword that have base stat 6s. So getting up to stat 8s is pretty tough for opponents to deal with.
And so Shenlong, in addition to Qi, harnesses the conditions, or the styles, rather. He has 4 styles. The High River style, which is all about flaming fists. The Low River style, which is about inner peace and healing. The Wandering River style, which is about jumping around, being tricky. And the Fermented River style, which is about getting really drunk. And every time he changes styles, all of his monks in play who have that style, because he has access to High River monks, Low River monks, etc., can immediately take the concentrate action, which is pretty powerful. And each style also gives him a passive ability in addition to a special unique attack. And Shenlong's students, his aspiring students, can also take those attacks. So he has a lot of flexibility. You can switch styles on the move to figure out what style would be best for you in any given situation, use its powerful attack, and then let your other models use that attack as well. But if you're not willing to do that, he just has Fury of the Dawn, which is a super powerful melee attack with 4 good triggers, and a ranged attack, Dragon's Light, which is a little bit weaker, but ignores Hard to Kill and Demise, which is kind of a neat little piece of tech.
Yeah, he's a master who's a true toolbox, and he's got a lot of those tools, and you really need to know when to apply them. Meaning his style upgrades and his various abilities. He's also not a master that on his face has a tremendous amount of damage potential, but because of the variety of triggers that you can get on his actions, he can actually clear the field pretty well, and he's very, very mobile and can get pretty much anywhere he needs to throughout the course of the game. He's between Qi, his average to high stats, and his access to multiple stat 6 abilities with very impactful triggers, he can really put the hurt on your opponent and debilitate their crew.
Yeah, you can do some tricks with him, but you can also just play a straightforward game where your crew is full of stat 8 beaters. So I think he's pretty cool. I've had a lot of fun playing with him. His title version is interesting. It's Shenlong the Teacher. So this version of Shenlong, the dragon's hold on him is weakened a little. And Shenlong is not actually that bad a guy. He really doesn't want all of the monks to be enthralled to the dragon forever. And he's been scheming to try to free his students from their influence so that they can really just pursue the art of spiritual perfection for its own sake. And so this version of Shenlong is much more calm and peaceful, and he's all about teaching his fellows how to use their abilities. So the most sort of popping out ability on the card is that those style upgrades he can give to other monks. He starts with 1, but he can give other monks the style abilities, which is pretty cool because those abilities are kind of balanced around only Shenlong having access to them. And when other models do, you kind of can do some cool stuff. But he also has some really fun scheme and strategy type play. He has any monk within 12 inches who would concentrate, which means either they take the concentrate action or one of the many triggers in the crew that let a model concentrate. They all have a trigger on their attacks that lets them concentrate. They can discard a card to take the interact action even if they're engaged, which means it's really hard to stop him from scoring. You spread monks out, and then the monk can punch you and get the trigger for the interact action, and then use that interact action to score the strat.
Yeah, and it's a huge area of influence. I mean, it's a 12-inch aura, which is pretty substantial. He also shares the academic superiority aura with Professor von Stuck, where he can actually turn off actions, abilities, and triggers printed on their upgrades. And being able to shut down enemy upgrades can be crippling for some crews.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter, but when it matters, it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
especially if you were paired against Von Stuck, incidentally.
Yeah. Yeah. So Shenlong's back of card is a bit more subtle than his front of card. In addition to his great teacher ability, which is the one we talked about that hands out upgrades. Now that ability, in addition to handing out upgrades, also gives a plus twist to all your minions' duels. And monks aren't awesome, but when they've got chi and built-in plus twists, they can actually do a lot of damage. But in addition to that, he has a fairly underwhelming melee attack. Dawn Staff is a stat 5, so you pretty much are always going to need to chi on it if you need it to hit. It does give you a chi back, but it's only a 2, 3, 4. I wouldn't do it unless you really need to. But he does have Years of Practice, which moves a friendly target up to 4 inches. And then if the target's a monk, it can take a concentrate action, which, remember, can be an interact action.
Indeed.
And beyond that, I think he's cool. He's got kind of cool buffing flexibility for his crew. He's not going to do as much damage. So really the downside is that you're relying on monks to do damage, and monks are somewhat fragile when they don't have chi especially.
Yeah, one of the nice things about him is that he does have a couple of ways that he can help increase the durability of some of his models by being able to hand out the style upgrades. One of them gives access to a healing ability. He also has a trigger on his River's Wrath ability, which can heal 2 and end a condition on the target, which is really nice. He's got a lot of ways to help enhance his crew's ability to do their job, and he does have some of the healing that the crew can lack or have in a very small area of influence.
Yeah, so I think he's cool. I'd have to see him on the table, but I can definitely see possibilities, especially in schemy pools.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, and who are we talking about next?
My absolute favorite Ten Thunders master from a thematic and fluff standpoint, Youko Hamasaki.
Youko Hamasaki. Now, Youko is the proprietress of the Key and Gong, which is also her keyword, which is a tea house. You can go to the Key and Gong to get companionship, wonderful conversation, nice sake, the Here Is Ither music, maybe play a game of, Go, or what's that thing with the Mahjong? There you go, yes. The tiles. Because remember, the Three Kingdoms is multicultural.
Yep.
Yoko is, of course, a spy mistress. Anything that happens inside the Key and Gong, she hears, or her girls hear, and they tell her, and she knows all of the information brokers in Malifaux, so she's got her fingers in many pies. She's very, very clever.
Yeah, one of the keywords abilities called leverage is pretty powerful. So the way that it works is during the start phase, if the opposing player has any revealed schemes, this model's crew gains a pass token. And then before performing a duel, this model can discard a pass token to receive a positive flip to the duel. So that ability triggers for every single model in your crew that has that front of card ability leverage. So if you've hired a full crew of 7 or 8 Key and Gong models, once turn 2 rolls around, if your opponent declares a scheme, then by the time you get to turn 3, a lot of times you're going to have 5+ pass tokens.
Yeah, and that's just unreasonable. I mean, you can give them all a bunch of plus twists, or you could just pass a million times and then activate all your models one after another with your opponent being unable to stop you.
Yeah.
Or you could just save them and have an enormous bonus on your next initiative flip and be guaranteed to go first. So she has huge flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. She also has the Unseen Manipulator ability, reducing your opponent's hand size by 1. And she's got a very powerful ability called Silent Control. It's a leader-only ability. But after an enemy model activates within 6 inches, it must either discard a card, or this model may choose another enemy model within line of sight that is not activated yet this turn. And then that model must activate instead of the original model. That ties in with one of her other front of card abilities, also a 6-inch aura, where after an enemy model within 6 inches discards a card from its control hand, this model can draw a card. And that's something that you're going to see happening a lot when we get to her back of card. Most of her abilities have the ability to force your opponent to discard cards, a lot of them one of them even of your choice, which is very powerful. and then she's drawing cards all the time. So she's always playing +1 hand size, and she's drawing cards constantly throughout the course of the turn.
So as you can have gathered by now, Yoko is very much a control master. She doesn't do that much damage. Now, her henchmen, Bill Algren, can do damage, and Kabuki warriors can do damage. But her crew is definitely a bit tricky to play, because if your opponent is choosing to just go all in to your throat and kill as much of your stuff as they can before worrying about schemes on turns 4 or 5, you're not triggering leverage. So you're not getting that extreme, advantage you need. Her crew does have some ability to generate pass tokens without it, but it's much more limited. And Qi and Gong models are fragile and don't do much damage. So if your opponent is just going for the throat, they can just kill half your crew before declaring their schemes. But the point is, they're trying to do that. You can manipulate them. And she has some really cool control abilities to make it harder to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And she has the ability to hand out a tremendous amount of distracted, which is really her crew's primary defense against really aggressive enemy crews. She can, with a stat 7 attack targeting willpower, hand out distracted X equal to the hand size difference between the two crews. And since she's always starting +1 and she's forcing your opponent to discard cards, there's a pretty good chance that every time you use this ability, you're going to be handing out distracted too. And it actually has a trigger on every suit, so you can adjust how you use this ability based on what you have in hand, which you're going to have a pretty good one because of all the card draw and the that is on her card. And then also you can change it to suit the needs of the situation. She also has a bonus action, again, stat 7 on willpower with a 10-inch range, and a built-in tome, which is very important, allowing you to look at your opponent's control hand. And then with that built-in tome, your opponent can discard a card of your choice and then draw a card. That discard would then also trigger her ability to draw a card as well. So forcing your opponent to discard a severe or even a joker can feel pretty rough playing against.
And she's even got a tactical action, We Own You, that once she's stacked up a bunch of distracted, she can cash it in to force the target to take a non-charge general action or a melee action. So it's just kind of an obey, but it's a tactical action, so you can't resist it.
Unresisted. And that ability has an extremely powerful trigger on a crow where after resolving, so regardless of whether or not you succeed, you gain 2 pass tokens.
Very strong.
So if you can get that off turn 1, that can put you in a very good spot for turn 2.
But her title version is very different. So this Yoko has decided all this information broker crap is for the birds. I'm just going to kill people. So she has become a ninja. In fact, she's so ninja, she makes original Misaki look like, I don't know, what's the opposite of ninja? Pirate?
Sure.
That's, I don't know. I had the internet in 2003, Ninjas and Pirates. So this ninja, Youko Hamasaki Unseen, is very, very hard to pin down. She's got stealth, so you can't shoot her from more than 6 inches away. She's got slippery, so if you're not in base to base with her, you can't make melee attacks against her. And she has a lot of abilities to hand out distracted, just like the original. And once she does hand out distracted, her friendly models, if they're near enemy models with distracted +2 or higher cumulatively, they get to build in suits.
Yeah, and her crew is full of models with extremely powerful triggers. So being able to do that, it can have a tremendous impact on the game. Another important point with her is she actually does not have leverage, which is very interesting that she doesn't have one of her keyword abilities. But instead, if she's the crew's leader, you automatically gain 2 pass tokens. So that means you're starting turn 1 with 2 pass tokens just for free, which is extremely powerful. Yeah,
this is strictly better than Ill Omens +2.
Yeah.
And Ill Omens +2 is a really strong ability. So
yeah, for sure.
In terms of what she's actually doing, she has a backstab. I think the backstab is a little bit of a trap. Yeah. It's a stat 7, it's a 2/3/4, and it ignores armor, and you can reduce the target's distracted condition to make them take more damage. So theoretically, it's a 4/5/6 stat 7 ignoring armor, which is pretty strong, but it's a 0-inch melee, and it's also tough to get her that close to the front and keep her alive.
Yeah.
And the trigger, there's only one trigger, and it's not that impressive.
Yeah, and another key thing that's very important about Youko too is that she can use that distracted, but she actually has to reduce it in order to deal this damage. She doesn't just get extra damage for the opponent having distracted. And her ability to hand out distracted is not as reliable as Youko one's. So it is a somewhat more scarce resource.
And her other actions, her tactical actions, are so good. She has Gather Intel, which lets her push a friendly model, make any nearby models take a test or become distracted. And then she has 2 triggers to let that model either attack or scheme. So the 2 different things you really want to be doing, you can go in either direction. And she has one of the nastiest bonus actions in the game. Reveal the top 7 cards of your opponent's deck. Choose any any one suit and discard all the cards of that suit. Shuffle all the other ones back. But she has a trigger on that. Black Stain, to pick one of the cards she discards and just remove it from the game entirely. So if you flip one of your opponent's 13s, you can just declare that suit and be like, bye.
Yeah, and then if you don't have that trigger handy, she can use the Mind Games trigger, which when resolving, you can set aside up to 3 of the revealed cards, and then after you shuffle the deck, you can place those set aside cards back on top in any order. So if you reveal a bunch of low cards, great. You can put a couple of weaks right on top of your opponent's deck. And since that's a bonus action, you can use it to either set up her activation or set your opponent up for failure on subsequent activations. Or later on in the game, if you're using pass tokens aggressively and you have a bunch of models yet to activate, you can enable your other models' activations, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, and removing cards like 13s is just so nasty. And if the opponent's not Dreamer, they can't do anything about it.
Right.
So she's very strong. I like her a lot.
Yep, definitely. She also has the ability to stack her own hand, which is pretty powerful. She's a master that, for a variety of reasons, can actually benefit from activating late. There's not a whole lot of reason to activate with her early. She's not really a heavy hitter. She can't look at your opponent's hand like original Youko can. She can't hand out a bunch of distracted at the start of the turn, that kind of thing. But if you activate her mid to late turn, you can actually use her information to broker ability, which requires no flip. It just goes off, where you can discard up to 2 cards and choose an equal number of non-Joker cards in your discard pile and draw them. So you can just pick up 2 Severes just for the cost of an AP. Yeah. And then she can actually pick 1 non-leader enemy within 3 inches of either her or her totem to just gain distracted 1 with no resist.
She's very strong. And that's Youko.
That's Youko.
Yeah. And in fact, that's the whole 10 Thunders faction. This is a great faction. They're a lot of fun to play. If you really like tricks and you really like playing aggressively and going for the throat, I think you want to go with the 10 Thunders. They have a really cool kind of diversity of human and non-human crews, and they also have that kind of Eastern influence to their aesthetic, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, very, very cool.
So we hope you enjoyed this video. I found it informative. There'll be a link in the description so you can get to the Goonhammer column, which is about the same content. And there's also going to be a link in the description to Jesse's podcast, Boring Conversation, which I really urge you to check out. It's a great podcast and you can learn a lot.
Yeah. And with that said, keep your conversations boring and stay weird, folks.
That's the one I just said.
That's the one you just said.
We're
gonna retake this.
Yeah, okay.
Hold on, can I cough now?
Yes.
And you're gonna clack us?
Yes, I will clack you.
Okay.
The clack is imminent.
Yeah, we can just restart this back.
Your audio
That's
levels
fine.
are literally a thing of beauty.
Yeah, I know.
Awesome.
I'm really hot.
It's like if Michelangelo could make a sculpture of your audio levels.
Sweet.